Hi everyone, my name is Vince Gellman. Thank you so much for visiting my channel. Once upon a time, there was a man who was caught in yet another vortex of worry. He was caught in another vortex of fear, of dread. Um, he had recently had an encounter with a friend, and after he left that encounter, he was worried that he'd offended that person somehow. And the fact that that person hadn't called him in a week, and normally that person would normally call him every week or so, the fact that he hadn't heard from him in a while made him go down this vortex of worry, this spiral of feeling like he did something wrong. And he knew he was working through old patterns of feeling like he was wrong inside, that he was bad, and that something bad was going to happen, and that something bad was going to happen to him, and that he was going to get punished. He knew that these were old patterns from this lifetime and previous lifetimes. He was a self-aware person, but that didn't stop him from using his mind to try and rationalize his way out of it. And as you know, often the more we do that, the more we get pulled down into that spiral. It's just never ending. There's always one other thing to trigger us that then we latch onto and we want to figure out, and down we go. And that is because the egoic mind is very deceptive. It's very good at luring us and luring us and luring us more and more into fear. It knows exactly what are our most tender fears, what are our most tender insecurities, and it knows how to work with them to pull us more and more into the spiral of reasoning. So it becomes never ending in a way. In a way, we're trying to resolve fear with fear. We're trying to resolve worry with more worry. And so it does become never ending. And so again, I'm guessing you can relate to that. I certainly can. So one day, and I guess I want to reiterate again, this man, he was a pretty awakened person actually. He was living in the light. He'd had very powerful experiences of communion with spirit. He'd had beautiful encounters with the Divine Mother, Divine Father, and his higher self was very much anchored in his cells. So he was an embodied person. He was embodying the light, but he was still human. He was still, someone that just you get caught up into spirals of suffering. So one day, during that time when he was in that particular spiral, he was met by an angel. And this angel put her arms around him, just corralled him with her arms. And she said, just walk away. Just walk away from it. You'll never, ever figure out that world of suffering. You'll never figure it out. There'll always be something else. Just walk away. And with some trepidation, with some resistance, he decided to follow her. And they slowly walked away and walked further away. And what he soon realized is that he was leaving his home altogether and leaving the boundaries of the city he lived in. And he was now floating over the mountains that were nearby the city. And when he reached the mountains, he looked back at the city and said, I have to go back. Like, he felt the more he was pulled away, he increasingly became anxious. He became afraid. And then in that moment, she said, that's exactly what's pulling you back into that spiral. That part of you that just doesn't want to let go of being afraid. That part of you that just has to keep looking for something to be afraid about or afraid of. That part of you that just keeps on needing to worry, needing to find problems because it's addicted to it. It's ensnared. It is caught, and it keeps pulling you back again and again. And at some point, you just have to walk away. And because, she said to him, because, dear one, because you've done enough healing work, because you're aware enough now, because you're not as attached to your suffering as most people are, you can simply walk away. And so he turned his back on the city, which was really turning his back on that pattern of suffering, that pattern of fear. The lower self, the egoic self that just needs to suffer, that needs to find problems to survive. And he kept going, and he could feel that part of him fighting, saying, no, go back. And he realized as he was going more and more towards the light, because that's where she was leading him, that lower self was fighting for its life. It needed him. It needed him to stick around so it could survive. And he looked back one more time at the threshold, and she said, you can go back. You can go back. But just know you will get pulled right back into it. And he goes, I'm not thinking about that right now. I'm thinking about all the other people who are suffering. And I'm leaving them all. And ultimately, I want to support them. I want them to end their suffering. She said, you can go back. But I tell you, you can only do so much if you lose yourself in that swamp of suffering. There's only so much you can do. You can go back and you will play the role of a helper. But ultimately, you are drowning in that suffering with them. You are drowning in that swamp of suffering. There's only so much you can do from there. But I feel like, he said, I feel like I'm turning my back on all these people, including my family and my friends. I'm turning my back on them to leave, to this is just so selfish of me. It seems that way, she said. It seems that way. But I tell you this, the only place you can be of service to them is from the light. That is the only place. If you go back in there, you will be a helper. And you are not a helper. You are wise enough, you are an advanced enough soul, you've done enough of your healing work that you can now give yourself to the light. You've purified yourself enough from the spell of darkness, from the attachments to the world. You've healed yourself enough, you've purified yourself enough that you can walk away from the world. And by walking away from the world, you're walking away from the lower self, the egoic self. And by walking away from the lower self, the egoic self, you are walking away from that world. They're interwoven. Walk away from the ego and you walk away from the world. It is all one system of suffering. And that's not who you are in essence. That's not who anyone down there is in essence. But they are not ready to leave that world. They are too caught up in it. They are too busy acting out their karma, acting out their suffering. They are too caught in it, and that's fine. That's their path right now. That's where their learning is, but that's not where you are now. And so it can seem like it's selfish, but it is actually the most loving thing you can do for yourself. And if it's the most loving thing you can do for you, it is the most loving thing you can do for them. And with that, he realized in his heart it was true. And so he continued onwards and went right into the light and gave himself to the light and lost the lower self to the higher self. The lower self that he once lost himself in dissolved into the light. And from that awakened state, from that empowered state, he came back. He came back. But he didn't go all the way as this bright light. He didn't go all the way into the city, into the swamp. He rather stood at his edge, a bit up the mountain, and he shone his light. He shone his light. And he stood there shining his light, availing that light to those who were ready to choose it, who saw that light shining from the mountains and were ready to come towards it and choose it. He did not go further than that. He did not go into the swamp. He did not go into that world of suffering, because he couldn't be of service there. He stood on the mountain and shined his light for those who are ready for it, who are ready to choose the light. And from that place, and only that place, could he be of service. So I'll leave that with you. If you enjoyed this video, I ask that you subscribe if it feels right, and click notifications. I hope this story was inspiring to you, and I wish you well in moving towards the light. Thank you.